Chapter 38. Luli. I trust you, Kadir. The moment Kadir had touched the tattoos on his wrist, Luli had known what he'd meant to do. There were far too many ghouls for them to defeat with blades and knives, so Kadir had suggested a different kind of weapon. Magic. His magic. Fire that would save them, but one that would also condemn him. He had begged her to trust him, and she would. She had entrusted her life to him many times. The least she could do was trust that he could protect his own. As she would protect him, and she would protect him too. She wasn't so weak she couldn't watch his back like he watched hers. I trust you, Kadir. Luli muttered the words on numb lips as the ghouls rushed toward them, as they loosed arrows and her vision blurred with tears. As Kadir fixed his gaze ahead and the tattoos snaking up his arm began to glow. I trust you, I trust you, I trust you. The words pounded through her mind. Kadir raised a hand. His fingertips sparked. The markings on his skin burned brighter and brighter until they were shining so vividly they seemed to set his body on fire, and he became a blinding streak of gold and red. Luli had to avert her eyes. She forced herself to breathe, in and out, in and... She heard something snap beneath her horse's hoofs. The sound was followed by an odd but familiar sigh, the hiss of shifting, falling sand. Luli looked down just in time to see the landscape beneath her yawn open. Shock muddied her mind as the sand fell away, revealing a trap that had not been there moments ago. She opened her mouth to scream, to cry for help, when something shoved her horse away from the chasm. Luli rolled in her saddle. She saw Kadir riding over the gaping hole, hand outstretched, the light fading from his skin. There was a moment of stillness. Kadir looked at her urgently, lips parted. And then he and his horse plummeted into the abyss. Luli was distantly aware of Kadir's name leaving her mouth as a scream, of sand crunching beneath her feet as she leapt from the panicked horse and sprinted toward the hole. She could hear the prince and thief dogging her steps, yelling her name. No! She rushed to the pit. No! The chasm was filled with iron. Blades crisscrossed the walls, jutting toward the center like crooked teeth. On the tips of those blades, silver and crimson blood, Kadir's horse torn and bleeding to death, and at the bottom of the pit, impaled on a graveyard of broken iron, silver blood on his skin, Kadir. Luli began to scream. Chapter 39. Luli. Once Luli had lived a nightmare. Like a dreamer, she had eventually woken and buried it in her mind. But though she had become very good at forgetting, the memories still haunted her in her sleep. She would see her parents' broken bodies, would see her campsite going up in flames. She would smell blood and death and forget how to breathe. And then Kadir would shake her awake. You were making a face in your sleep. I thought it rude to keep staring. And just like that, the nightmare would dissipate, because so long as she avoided belonging anywhere, belonging with anyone, she would never have to relive that heartbreak. But she had been wrong, because she was living a nightmare now, and Kadir wasn't waking her up. Now she was yelling his name, but no matter how many times she called him, he did not respond. Fuck! Luli vaguely realized Aisha was standing beside her, staring into the pit, face ashen. Your bodyguard was a djinn? I have to wake Kadir. The words were roots, drawing her into a safe place untouched by time. When Aisha put her hands on Luli's shoulders, Luli pushed her away. They're coming. She could barely hear Omar's voice over her pounding heart. Distantly, she was aware of the smear of silver blood on the blades of the careful way they had been constructed around the hole. But none of that mattered. She had eyes only for Kadir. She was still willing him to open his eyes and look at her when she heard the sound of a scuffle behind her. Frenzied footsteps and the exhale of blades, a loud inhuman hiss. By the time she turned with her dagger in hand, it was too late. A group of ghouls grabbed her from behind, and no amount of struggling could break their grip. They clung to her like blood-sucking leeches. She screamed. Shh! None of that! A voice spoke into the chaos, and Luli froze. It laughed, a soft wheezing sound that seemed to come from lungs filled with sand. What an honor it is to run into not one, but two legends. She looked up and stared. The stranger was garbed entirely in black, more shadow than man. His features were hidden, everything except for his dark eyes, which were barely visible beneath between his layered scarves. The hunter in black, the nameless gin killer. She remembered a knife against her skin, laughter, blood running down her neck. Do you desire death or slavery, girl? A dark fog encapsulated her mind. She moved without thought, lunging forward with a feral cry. The man watched expressionless as the ghoul subdued her and made her kneel. His eyes twinkled, and in them Luli saw her blood-soaked memories. Ah, a little girl, what a grand prize you will make. Memories blended into reality as Luli sagged to the ground. Darkness coated her vision, and in it she saw the slew of nightmares she'd thought buried long ago. She saw her mother waving at a jar, urging her to hide, while killers stormed their camp. She saw the tents go up in flames, saw her mother's and father's bodies lying broken on the ground. And now, Kadir, no, grief splintered her thoughts. Don't think about it. I did not think you had such sharp claws, Midnight Merchant. The hunter turned away before she could formulate a response, his gaze settling on Omar, who'd been pushed to his knees by ghouls. I am amused to see you reduced to a mere escort, Prince. Aisha, who was sitting close enough to the prince to brush his shoulder, hissed between her teeth, How dare you speak to my king like— The hunter slapped her so fast and hard her head lolled. Luli was not sure who looked more shocked, Aisha or the prince. The hunter clicked his tongue. You never did know when to be quiet, Bitluas. His eyes narrowed. Hold your tongue or I will cut it from your mouth. Aisha blinked hard and slow. Wait, Imad? The hunter did not respond, not in their language at least. Strong guttural sounds escaped his throat, more growls than words. The two ghouls holding Aisha pushed her head down until she was prostrated on the ground. The very same. I am humbled one of Omar's thieves remembers my name. The hunter's voice dripped with venom. He looked away, back to the prince. Omar looked like he wanted to sink into the sand. Imad looked like he wanted to bury him in it. How ironic that our positions are now reversed, Prince. Do you remember our last meeting, when you forced me to grovel and beg forgiveness for your crimes? He stepped forward, feet gliding soundlessly across the sand. Luli's eyes snagged on his hands, which were bandaged and misshapen. Well, Imad glared at the prince. Omar stared back at him helplessly. There was no recognition in his eyes. My king need not waste his breath speaking to a traitor like you, Aisha snapped. Imad did not even turn to face her. I will not warn you again, little thief. Seal your lips. I will make sure you never flap them again. Aisha's eyes flared with defiance, but the prince simply said, For God's sake, Aisha. He faced Imad with a bravado that quickly wilted beneath his gaze. What is it you want? If it's gold— Gold? Ha! You could offer me an entire kingdom, and I would not bat a lash. No, I do not care for your gold. I want you. He paused, his gaze straying to Luli and her. Go die in a hole. The words escaped Luli's mouth before she could think them. Imad reached up and withdrew the scarf from around his mouth to reveal a slanted smile of glimmering crooked teeth. Like your pathetic gin friend? Luli's vision bloomed red. She lurched forward with a scream, knocking one of the ghouls off its feet. She managed only a single step before three ghouls detached from the watching group to restrain her. One knocked a bony fist into her stomach, and she keeled over. Imad sighed. Are all women this unruly now? Tears rolled down Luli's cheeks, but they were not from the pain. Give him back, she whispered. Imad raised a brow. You think me a god? I'm flattered, merchant. But while it is my profession to take lives, I am afraid I am not in the business of giving them back. The last vestiges of Luli's rage burned away, leaving behind nothing but a damp sorrow. The tidal wave of grief washed over her suddenly, taking with it the last of her strength. She collapsed to her knees with a sob. I hadn't expected the mighty king of the 40 thieves to travel with a djinn. Imad's voice was quiet beneath her screaming grief. I didn't believe my ghouls when they said they'd smelled one. But then I thought, what's the harm in setting up a trap? I'm glad I did. I don't want to think about the chaos your djinn would have wreaked with its magic. Imad snapped his fingers and said something in the strange foreign language made up of garbles and grunts. A command, Luli realized, as the ghouls poked and prodded her. They stole Kadir's dagger and peeled the rings off her fingers. One of them grabbed the bag of infinite space from her saddle. She watched blankly as they stole Aisha's blades and Omar's belt of black daggers. The prince shuddered as they reached for the bangle on his arm. He mumbled something, a prayer, beneath his breath. The ghoul unclasped the armlet. One moment Luli saw the high prince, the next Omar was gone, replaced by a man with bright golden eyes. She stared uncomprehendingly at Prince Mazen. Imad's smile faded abruptly. What trickery is this? The man in front of her was undeniably the bumbling, curious prince she'd rescued in the souk. The sheltered storyteller yearning for adventure, the only royal whose company Luli had found tolerable. No matter how many times she blinked, Prince Mazen remained. The stories, the softness around the edges, it hadn't made sense to her until now. This whole time she had been traveling with the wrong prince. The prince did not answer, only eyed Imad warily. But how? Imad reached forward as if to touch him. Many things happened then. Aisha bint Luas, who had been keeled over on the ground, suddenly lunged toward one of the ghouls. She stole one of her blades back and lopped off its head. There was a blur of movement as she swung her shamshir at Imad, and then a scream. Splatters of crimson on the sand, Imad's bandaged hand red with blood. "You bitch!" His eyes sparkled with murder as he grabbed a knife and struck at Aisha. The first blow bounced off her shamshir. The second knocked the blade from her hands. The third struck her face and drew a scream from her lips. The fourth ripped a gash into her shoulder. Imad struck again and again until the sand beneath Aisha was stained with her blood. Imad flipped the dagger, raised it into the air, and "Stop!" The prince slid in front of Aisha, arms held out. "Please!" His voice cracked. Imad halted. He glared so hard at the prince, Luli feared he would kill him. But then, slowly, he sheathed his dagger and barked an order at the ghouls. The last thing Luli saw was Prince Mazen crouched over Aisha's limp body, desperate, tears in his eyes. Then Luli was struck in the head. She experienced a pain so terrible it knocked the breath from her lungs, and then finally, blissfully, darkness.